Hey everyone! Today we'll be tackling a common misconception that many people have about following Jesus. Have you ever heard someone say that following Jesus will make your life better? Some people believe that Jesus wants you to follow him so he can fix all the problems in your life and make everything easy. They say Jesus will make all your friends like you, he'll make you a better athlete, a better doctor, give you more money. But is that really what Jesus said? It may surprise you what Jesus actually said when he called people to follow him.
This is the Bible Sojourner.
Jesus said that following him requires being willing to sacrifice your closest relationships. In Luke 14, verse 26, Jesus said, in order to follow him, if you really want to be his follower, you must be willing to hate even your family. He said, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. In the ancient world, much like many families today, the family was the closest bond imaginable. Friendships were important to be sure, but family, that was irreplaceable. Family relationships are the most important relationships in the world. And here, what Jesus is saying, he says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, he cannot be my disciple? Now, some of you might think to yourself, oh, I hate my family all the time. Well, there are other things that we should talk about with regard to that. But what he's assuming here, which is normal, although there are exceptions, is that your family members are the closest relationships to you. Traditionally and historically, family is the bond that holds all things together. And this isn't actually zeroing in on the fact that you need to hate everyone in your family. The idea here is that following Jesus must take priority over those closest relationships, which is assumed to be family, but of course would assume every other relationship because it's a greater to the lesser kind of argument. Just because somebody didn't have a family and they said, well, I have no family, therefore I can follow Jesus and it'll be easy. You know, the point is every relationship, even the closest relationships that you have, are subservient to Christ. And so the simple point is this: you must love Jesus more than anyone else. Now, this isn't the only place Jesus talks about this. We also see this concept of what we could call comparative love in Matthew 10:37. Jesus says there, whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Jesus was rather clear on this issue. Following Jesus means your allegiance to him comes before everything else, before everyone else, even the closest relationships in your life. Now, he doesn't stop there. Second, Jesus said that following him requires self-sacrifice. On the one hand, you might think, oh, okay, I can hate those who are around me. I can sacrifice those relationships just as long as I get a little me time. But Jesus didn't stop there. He said following him requires being willing to sacrifice those relationships that are dearest to you personally, internally, your own desires, your own commitments. Yes, Luke 14:26 says that your relationship to Christ must be to such a priority that your relationship with everybody else is as if it were hate. But even your own life needs to be subservient to Christ so that your desires, your dreams, your ambitions, all of those are as if you hate those compared to the desires of Christ. In other words, you must be willing to sacrifice everything, all your goals, all your desires to follow Jesus. Now, that's a pretty high standard, but Jesus even goes beyond that in the very next verse. He says, whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. Now, bearing a cross in the ancient world was done by criminals who were about to be crucified. Jesus himself bore his own cross on the way to his crucifixion until someone by the name of Simon of Cyrene had to carry it for him. And Jesus' point is this: if it comes down to it, you need to commit to Jesus even if it means torture and death. This is a very, very high level of commitment that Jesus is asking for. If you want to follow Jesus, your whole life is now his. All your priorities, all your ambitions, even your right to live. All of these need to be surrendered to Jesus. Now, this goes against what we're always being told in many of our churches, whether you're listening to many of the radio programs, podcasts, people will say, hey, well, you need to take care of yourself. You need to prioritize yourself. And what Jesus is saying is you need to give yourself up. This is complete commitment to him. And he doesn't stop there. You need to be willing to give up your relationships. You need to be willing to give up your very life if necessary. But he also says, following him requires you be willing to give up all that you have. In Luke 14, as Jesus is explaining this, he gives two parables or illustrations about what this looks like in everyday life. He gives a story about a man who's building a tower. And as that man builds the tower, Jesus says, what kind of project would this be if he didn't take into consideration whether or not he would be able to complete the tower? And of course, the point is obvious. You need to count the cost. You need to see whether or not you can follow through on this commitment. And he gives another illustration about a king preparing for battle. And likewise, the king needs to assess whether or not he can actually engage his foe in battle or whether he needs to send a message asking for peace. The point that Jesus is making in Luke 14 is that this is a big decision, and there are decisions in life that require us to assess things. It requires us to count the cost before we start something. And so when Jesus encapsulates this message at the very end, he says, after giving all these illustrations, painting this picture, he says, therefore, any of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple. Now again, Jesus' point is profound as much as it is simple. The point is, following Jesus requires that we not hold on to anything. We must be willing to give it all up. Now, we see this illustrated in other places as well. Maybe you're familiar with the story of the rich young ruler. When Jesus asked this rich young ruler to sell all his possessions and give the money to the poor, the rich young ruler refused. Why? Because he couldn't let go of his wealth. See, he valued his stuff over following Jesus, and that prevented him from following Jesus. Now, when Jesus is calling to his would-be disciples, he's saying you need to be willing to let go of everything. Your money, your possessions, your homes, your cars, etc. Some of you are very rich. You have lots of cars and your Lamborghinis to get rid of. But the point is, everything must be willing to be sacrificed for Christ. Now, the bottom line is this. Don't follow Jesus thinking he'll make your life better or bless you, give you more cars, more wealth, more ease in life. He never promised to make your life easy. Over and over again, Jesus called on people to follow him because he was the king, not because he was going to make them rich. He demands a lot of his followers. The renowned C.S. Lewis, maybe you've heard of him, had a famous passage which was known as the trilemma instead of the dilemma or the dilemma. So 3 instead of 2. And he argued that Jesus was so clear in his demands for complete submission that you're only left with one of 3 options. First, you could say that Jesus was a lunatic. Maybe he had the ravings of a madman. Or perhaps you could just say he's a liar. I mean, he was making some outlandish claims and maybe he was deceiving people. Maybe he himself was deceived. But if he's not a lunatic, somebody who's crazy or mad, and if he's not a liar, then what was he saying? And that is the only remaining option, is that he was declaring himself to be Lord and worthy of our submission. I'd love to hear your take on Luke 14 and Jesus' radical call for discipleship. Is this a message that is missing in our churches, or do you hear this in your church? I'd like to know. Drop a comment on YouTube or social media, or contact me through petergaiman.com. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and make his face shine upon you.